Phil Brennan is not. Thank you. Phil ने ज्वाइन किया है? See. Somewhere. उसको लिंक भेज दिया?
Yeah.
फिल को भेज दिया? Muzammil, you there?
Yes, I'm here, sir.
Okay. We could not see you. That's the problem.
I'll be with you in just a couple of minutes.
Okay. Just show up and we will start. Phil is going to join us shortly, and so is Imran Hussain and Afzal Khan. I think we are going to start. Everybody ready? Muzammil, show up yourself.
Tough.
That's okay. We're gonna go. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Let's begin today's webinar, which is Digital Apartheid in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. We acquired this title from the recently released report by the Jammu Kashmir Coalition of Civil Society, Internet Siege in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, which deals with the impact of the longest lockdown in the history, the internet lockdown, the internet siege, and also the military clampdown in Indian occupied Kashmir, and the impacts it had on the livelihood, health, education, justice, press freedom, and other rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. To discuss this, we have with us a very learned panel. We will be joined shortly by Phil Benin, former MEP, and also we have been joined by Mr. Khalid Mahmood, Shadow Minister of the Labour. He was also Shadow Foreign Minister before this. And we have been joined by Mariana Zaka. She's from Italy, an expert in international human rights law. She's a very good friend of Kashmir. She has been advocating for the rights of the people of Kashmir at international level. And we have also with us Sania Munir. Sania Munir is an assistant professor at the School of Integrated Social Sciences at the University of Lahore. For Kashmir Studies. She is a former Digital Humanities Fellow in Studies, North Carolina Central University. Her research interests are also the government, politics, Pakistan, and armed conflict, women empowerment, and others. And also we have been joined by Mr. Muzammil Ayub Thakur, a young and energetic activist of Kashmir, a very vocal voice on the international arena. He's a debater. He takes part in different activities around the globe on Kashmir and on different electronic platforms. We will be shortly also joined by Mr. Imran Hussain, who is also a senior shadow minister and also deputy leader of APG. And we will be joined by Mr. Afzal Khan, who is also shadow minister and deputy leader of Labour in the House of Representatives. To begin with, I'll start with Ms. Sania Munir, as she has another commitment, as I know, after this. So Sania, you have the floor. Sania, you may start.
Very much introduction to you. I'm audible, sir.
Sania, we can't hear you. Hi, Sania. Hello.
I'm audible to you, sir.
Yeah, now you are audible. You can start.
Okay, thank you very much, sir, for a very generous introduction, and I'm very much grateful to the Kashmir Institute of International Relations and the World Muslim Congress for organizing a very timely seminar on webinar on the apartheid, digital apartheid of the Kashmir, and indeed each need of the time. So when we talk about the digital apartheid, we can see the targeted denial of the digital right. We can see it in Kashmir as a systematic form of discrimination and the digital repression and the collective punishment of the region of the resident for the Kashmiris. And if we talk about the digital apartheid and they are completely denied from their digital rights, which are their basic fundamental rights, If we see the lockdown in the Kashmir, we can see Kashmir is under the double lockdown, one which has been imposed after the August 5th, and the second one is after during the COVID, and they are completely denied from their basic fundamental right, and the digital rights is one of them. When we see the whole world, like we can see everyone of us like the organizing the webinar conferences, we are teaching online, students are attending online classes, and we are calling our friends during the pandemic. But unfortunately during this time, Kashmir is completely denied from their basic fundamental rights, and almost 12.5 million people in the region can barely make a video call to their friends, and they cannot attend the online classes, webinars and the conferences. And most important, which has been also mentioned in the report which we are talking about, like they cannot access the rules and the regulation and the recommendation during the pandemic, which has been mentioned by the World Health Organization. Now one can imagine how much they're denied from their basic fundamental rights. And I would also like to quote the one technological researcher, Pratik, and he estimated a loss of almost 3.5 million hours, which has been disrupted due to the internet access, and almost 12.25 million people after 13 days after the 5th August. And we're sitting here and we are using almost like the 4G, and it can access all these places, webinars and the conferences and the online classes with the 2G. So after having all this situation in mind, we can simply say that these are the tools which has been using like the other tools like rape as a tool already using as a tool of war, and the same the digital apartheid is also the tool of the war. And I would also add one thing more, like one report two reports has been published by the United Nations, and it has been also mentioned that the ubiquitous phenomena and disruption of the internet in the Kashmir and the telecommunication disruption is also a ubiquitous phenomena which has been observed in the two reports, 2018 and the 2019. And such prolonged and the crippling digital says are the technical, you can say, are the technique of the political repression and the severe impediment to the enjoyment of the constitutionally and internationally granted civil, political, and the social economic rights. So, here is very important to raise the voice as we are working. Working, and we are raising our voice through the different channels. So but unfortunately when we are using social media platform to highlight our voices, again we are facing some very restrictions, and most of the time we get our accounts blocked. And I also suffered with this strategy when they are blocking our Twitters, they are blocking our Facebook accounts, because these all are the tools which they are using. So we need to be very much active to raise their voices. So as you already mentioned, like health also health sector is also marked as a decline due to the digital apartheid. When we were sitting during the pandemic in our houses, and we were using different apps to fulfill our daily needs, and when we but unfortunately they were denied. And education sector is also suffered a major setback due to this digital apartheid. And as you also mentioned, like the justice also is a systematic delay, and it's also further compounded by the ineffective online hearings. And we are all very much aware, like the justice delayed is a justice denied. So and I will also include the press freedom freedom, like the freedom of the speech, expression, and the social participation. It's suffered from the direct impact and the chilling effects of the online surveillance. So all these perspective which has been discussed in the report is very much important to be highlighted, and it's very important to talk about the cost and the effects, which many facts I have also mentioned, like in 2018 and 2019 report of the United Nations, and almost 12.25 billion people are suffering. So all these factors are very important to discuss and need to be highlighted through the social media. And at the end, I will must congratulate you to organizing this very important webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sania. As you all know, today is one of the sad days in our history, as every day is a sad day for the people of Kashmir. One of the prominent civil liberties lawyer, Babar Qadri, was shot yesterday as an unknown gunman, and it has been the practice of the perpetrators that on some of the occasions, important occasions, one or the other important personality or rights activists are targeted by them. So
Mr. Wani, we can't hear you anymore.
yeah, sorry. Phil Bannon is a British Liberal Democrat politician. He served as member of the European Parliament from the West Midlands from 2012 to 2014, and then from 2019 to 20. He was described as someone to be reckoned with the European Parliament by President of the European Liberal Hans van Bellen, MEP. He sat on the Committee of Foreign Affairs and Subcommittee on Human Rights, and also acted as substitute on the Committee on the Internal Market and Consumer Protection as a member of 9th Parliament from July 2019 to January 2020. Phil Bannon has also an expertise on this digital siege and on how it works and what causes it has. So I'll give the floor to Mr. Phil Bannon. Phil Bannon, you have the floor.
Right, just let me unmute. Yes, of course, I was also on the delegation to South Asian nations in the European Parliament on both occasions that I was in the Parliament. So I have quite strong links with South Asia. Now, my current role is with Liberal International, which is the international group globally of liberal parties. And this is a subject which we are working on at the moment. In fact, we have a draft agenda of 10 points which we consider in terms of digital rights. We're going to be discussing this in a webinar ourselves next month with a view to actually adopting these 10 principles in terms of digital rights. And the previous speaker actually went through quite a few of these herself, and I thank her for that. Now, we started off by saying that any human rights respected in the real world should be equally respected in a digital form. Now, of course, in the situation in Kashmir, that is clearly not the case, in that freedom. Well, we'll come to freedom of information and those basic freedoms, which are respected to a certain extent still in the real world, are not being delivered digitally. The second point is that any legislation and technical tools put in place affecting human rights must be robust enough to be acceptable under any government, benevolent or not. Now, we can also ask whether the lockdowns that we're seeing in India would be acceptable to a different government, and I think they probably wouldn't. So I think that clause was put in largely, I think, because of what goes on in China, which is where they don't so much have internet lockdowns, but they have their own. They don't have access to the World Wide Web. They have their own Chinese censored version, but it's equally relevant in this case. We also say that technological innovation should be an inclusive process where no part of the world or group in society is left behind. Well, if you're taking out actually an area of a country where the people have a particular identity, you're clearly breaching that principle. And we also say we openly and persistently denounce the use of internet shutdowns as a hindrance for enjoyment of human rights, such as access to information and freedom of expression. But these are the two key points, and they were developed very well by the last speaker. This isn't. I think this is the area where we're most concerned, and we have discovered with a little bit of research that India is by far the worst offender in terms of internet shutdowns, and it isn't only the Kashmiri one. They've been using it as a tool. So the internet shutdowns, we've gone beyond the age when people got their daily newspaper every day, and even a lot of people who still get their daily newspaper get that online. It's gone out of print and it's there online now. So people don't even know what's going on. So if you prevent people receiving the information, they really have not got the information as to form their views on what and how they should be opposing what governments are doing. So the two things go together. That restricting information and restricting the use of social media so you can actually then go online and make your own views known in the modern world is the equivalent of newspaper bans, closing newspapers down, burning books or whatever that we had in ages gone by. I think this is why we in Liberal International are actually trying to formalise this process at the moment and say and actually develop some principles on digital rights, because it's a new thing and the human rights we've accepted over the years need to move with the times. And I think that if we can do this, we can see that using this as an example, we can see that virtually every principle of digital rights is being contravened in this case, in Kashmir in particular. I just want to say one or two things about about other areas where rights might be contravened, and that is economically. We see now again the economies have moved forward, so that there's an awful lot of economic development takes place online. We have entrepreneurs who are basically digital entrepreneurs, even if they're actually providing goods and services. Their whole marketing takes place online, and by using an internet shutdown, you're actually constraining the economic development of a region, and in that sense, you're setting it back. You're restricting its educational possibilities, and you're setting it back. So you're bearing down on an area economically as well as in terms of freedom of expression, and that's of course an issue of attrition, whereby over a number of years, the longer that goes on, the worse things will get. and Kashmir will go backwards. It will not be able to even keep up with the economic progress of India because of these shutdowns. So we have to oppose these things on all these levels. And I mean, governments will very often say, well, we need to look at wrongdoers and we can't just let them carry on. But in sophisticated societies, we have started to look at instruments to keep wrongdoers under surveillance, and we're looking at this in our principles as well. So we need to make sure that if you are trying to keep wrongdoers under surveillance, this can be done without degrading the privacy of the entire society. You can't try to put a whole society under surveillance. It is wrong. So these are the principles we're looking at. We can see quite clearly that India is breaching them in Kashmir and elsewhere. And I think with that, I shall hand back to the chair.
Thank you, Phil, for your contribution as you rightly pointed the platforms for the economic development, for the health, education.
Can I just add that we will be looking, when we run our event next month, we're quite keen to look for a speaker with a deep knowledge of the situation in Kashmir in terms of this digital shutdown. So we are on the lookout for speakers. So you might be able to help me there.
Yeah, sure. So you rightly point out about the way the digital apartheid, or you may say online restrictions, are impinging upon the economic development, on the education, health sector, and other sectors. And the Kashmiris are the worst sufferers of this, because India has been the worst offender of this from last decades. So when the social media and other media came, there were frequent internet shutdowns, but from 5th August onwards, we saw a total internet shutdown and digital siege in Kashmir. And that's what we are discussing. We have a very extensive report on this by Jammu Kashmir Coalition of Civil Society on this, and the UN Special Rapporteurs also called this siege as a collective punishment to the people of Kashmir. So now I will give floor to Mr. Khalid Mahmood, Shadow Minister and MP. Khalid Saab is a very good friend of ours. Wherever we call him, he is there, be in Geneva or on these webinars. Khalid Saab, you have the floor.
Ji, Assalamualaikum, and thank you very much. Great to see Philip there. We actually live quite close. My constituency is very close to his farm. Whilst we may not agree everything politically, but I think one thing we definitely agree on is the issue of Kashmir. And I commend Philip for the lot of work that he's done for a long time on this issue, whether he's been in office or not. And I think that shows the dedication of the person, the way that he has worked. So I thank Philip very much for doing that. And really, I think, look, today, we are talking about digital apartheid. And the real issue here is that's a very important, but also a very small part of what's going on in terms of the occupied Kashmir at the moment. The biggest issue is that for now, since August last year, we've had this draconian lockdown where nobody's rights in any way, form, or shape are at all respected. There are complete and utter abuse of every single human right that there is. There is an abuse of the Geneva Convention. I know our colleague from Italy, I'm sure will have a lot more understanding of that in terms of international law that we're talking about. And I think really what we have to do is get back onto a footing. And certainly in terms of Europe, UK, and the West, what we have to do, as we are perceived to be the custodian of human rights and civil liberties, and we're always talking about that. I think only yesterday there were comments from our government in the UK talking about looking at what's going on in Belarus and how, quite rightly, we should talk to the international criminal courts about what's going on there. But if we can do that, why can't we look at a dispute for over 72 years where the people have continuously been in a position where they've had almost 500,000 military on their backs, an absolutely horrendous condition to be in, no privacy, no human right, no civil liberty, everything that has been taken away from us. Dignity has been taken away from the people of Kashmir. You know, every single right that you have has been taken away. There is no right for a woman to live an independent and dignified life, whether she's a mother, daughter, or a wife, people, a man, whether you're a father, husband, or a brother, or a son. You can, in any way that they see fit, they can charge you on some spurious charges and take you out of Kashmir and place you in where family don't even know where you are, which part of India you are, or if you're anywhere, or if you're alive, to do that. We've had unearthed mass graves in Kashmir by Indian non-governmental organizations. So I think this is really important to see the people who have found the information, and we have that. And when we found mass graves on these issues, we still don't get movement from our governments and the United Nations. And I think it's really important now, and we've gone on too far about this. I, for one, with Muzammil, inshallah, we're trying to do some work on this in the next few weeks, and hopefully we'll be getting some stuff out on the some issues that we want our government to push and look at. So as soon as we get that formulated, I'm sure we'll be passing it on to everybody else. But it's too long. This has gone on for too long. And really, I am very, very tired of saying words to placate the people of Kashmir, but no action to deliver what's going on for them, to deliver, to support them, to see some light for them, to give back to normality. And I think that's the first thing all of us are going to look at, how we do that. You know, digital sort of clampdown is a big issue. It again takes away all those fundamental rights that you have. I think that's really the problem that we have. All of this is based on abuse of every single imaginable right that any person could have, whether it's Geneva Convention, whether it's all the other rights of human rights, of civil liberties that we take for granted, that these people don't have and really never had. I think there's been complaints about what the neighbors are doing, what Pakistan's been doing, and whatever's happened. All that's been resolved by and large now. And I think what there is an indigenous issue and movement within Kashmir that has really been put under thumbscrews for too long. People have been shot with pellet guns in their eyes deliberately to blind them, deliberately to tag them so when they go through sensors that they can be picked up, deliberately done so, at will. You know, we've got a huge movement at the moment in the US about Black Lives Matter. But it appears to nobody, not to United Nations, not to anybody else, that Kashmiri lives at all matter. And I think that's really it. And I don't want to say too much because we've said all this before, but too much. You know, and I'll see how we can move forward. As I say, Phil's been a great supporter and a great friend of Kashmir, and I thank him for the work. I think our colleague Marina from Italy would be useful actually to touch base on some of the issues international law-wise, and perhaps we can communicate through, I don't know whether Muzammil can get a hold of your details or anybody else in this institute, and we can share details and start to look at some of the things that we want to do in terms of legal support in the issues that we're raising. So I think that would be quite useful if you can do that, please. And we'll see how it goes. And I know that my great colleague now, Afzal Khan, yeah, it is Afzal, yeah. Afzal Khan is here. He's a great member of parliament. He's a great member of European Parliament. And he's worked very well with us on this issue for a long time. And of course, he's one of our members of parliament now. He's the shadow leader of the House. So I think we got the right people here. And what we want to do is move forward and see what we can do. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. But really, I think we need to take steps rather than just carry on giving platitudes to people of Kashmir.
Thank you,
Back to you, sir.
It's good to learn from you that you and Muzammil and other colleagues are. Hello? Khalid, you hear me?
I can hear you very well. Thank you. Yeah.
Khalid, you there?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So thank you very much. And I welcome Dr. Afzal Khan, the shadow minister and the shadow leader and MP, and he was an MEP, former MEP, a good friend of Kashmir. Warm welcome to him. Now I'll give floor to Muzammil Ayub Thakur. We will have some first-hand information from Kashmir, as Muzammil is closely working with the Kashmiri activists back on town, and he will have the insight on those issues. Muzammil, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for hosting us all, including myself. I echo what all the other previous speakers have said, and I'm glad that this subject is also being touched upon. More often than not, we speak about so many different types of human rights violations, and I think, as Khalid Saab said, that it's been done to death so many times that how many times will we speak about these atrocities and the world doesn't hear. And I'm so glad that he brought up the issue of Belarus as well, because only yesterday it occurred to me, the same way it must have occurred to everybody else, that if the United Kingdom are willing to put sanctions on a nation whose leader has committed human rights violations, then why not some kind of justice to be delivered for those people that are in Kashmir that have suffered for 70 years. And I know that the subject is about digital apartheid, but I'm also pleased that Aldaf Saab, you mentioned Babar Qadri and how he was killed yesterday. Babar Qadri was a dear friend of mine, and he was killed yesterday, you know, within the last 24 hours. He is survived by two young daughters who will now be without a father. And he is also an example of the kind of digital apartheid, the kind of consequence of being on social media and speaking up against the Indian occupation for the rights of people of Kashmir. Now, when we talk about the digital apartheid, I think in history, in the future history, when they look back upon Kashmir, they're going to think about Kashmir and the digital lockdown post 2019, August 5th. However, we know as Kashmiris, we've seen that this is not new. We've seen digital lockdowns since as far as back as I can remember, since 2008, when the internet became more mainstream in Kashmir and social media was being used more readily, and it was more readily available. But if we do talk about the last year, let me make a few points so that people understand exactly the kind of impediments that the people of Kashmir go through. So critically ill patients could not access government healthcare or seek insurance reimbursements online. And that is something that we take for granted in the West and everywhere else. Students could not apply for fellowships or scholarships, and other students that were young enough to go to school that couldn't go to school weren't able to use Zoom classes. And the reason for that is, while everybody else in the world talks about 5G and how we're going to get into the modern age, the people in Kashmir suffered a downgrade from 4G to 2G, and in many cases, not even 2G existed. Distraught families could not connect to relatives outside of Kashmir to let them know that they were dead or alive, or to even tell them that they were healthy and not to worry. Somebody mentioned about the local tech companies. Many of those, including those of my friends, had to close down, shut down, because their entire business was based on technology and online tools. $5.3 billion loss to the Kashmir economy and counting. That number was only released, I think, about a month ago. So every month, that economic loss is just increasing more and more. And there are more than 500,000 job losses since last year as well. The internet, when we talked about the downgrading of 4G down to 2G, let me give you an example of exactly how slow it is. Compared to the rest of the world, the internet in Kashmir is 20,000 times slower. Just understand that concept, 20,000 times slower. And because of that slow speed, the COVID-19 response in Kashmir has also been very slow. World, which change every day, and the kind of information that we're getting is always, that are inside occupied Kashmir are unable to keep up or keep tab on that information. Now, there are no schools in Kashmir, not just because of the COVID-19 situation, but also the post-August 5th situation as well. So children that had to go to school were unable to go to school. And while the rest of the world were using Zoom, and how we as well are using Zoom, it is not accessible inside Kashmir because of the lack of internet facilities. And therefore, children have no routine and no structure, and therefore their futures are at risk. The local mental health professionals assess that there is acute anxiety, panic attacks, suicidal tendencies, and even symptoms of PTSD growing among children. I mean, this is already a conflict zone as it is, and we witness every day the different types of tragedies that happen. For example, just only yesterday, my own friend Babar Qadri, and what his children must be going through right now, that is exactly what most other children are going through, irregardless of the internet. And as a result of this net siege, an entire generation is deprived of their education and their future, leading to further mental health crises in a conflict zone. Now, even outside of this COVID-19 situation, I want to talk about post-August 5th and even pre-August 5th, what we've seen inside Kashmir on a regular basis of how WhatsApp groups and Facebook accounts I mean, the surveillance is being used on them. Everybody's account is being monitored to make sure that they are not so-called anti-nationals and speaking against the Indian government's atrocities in Kashmir. WhatsApp group admins have been requested. I mean, when I use requested, I use that term very loosely. They've been demanded that they report to the police station, hand over their phones, and give the information of the access code to their phones, and then give information of their WhatsApp groups, who are part of those groups, and what messages have been shared. And people going to Kashmir, even my own friends and family, and people only as recently as yesterday in one of those WhatsApp groups declared himself out of the groups, and he had to delete his social media because he said he was going to Kashmir. And the reason he does that, and many other people do, is because we know that the moment you land in Kashmir, one of the first things that the so-called military forces, the armed forces, the occupational forces inside Kashmir will do, or the police for that matter, is grab your phone, demand an access code, and look at all of your social media accounts and make sure that you are not speaking against India. Even Twitter users, and this is even most recently, there was news that came out a few weeks ago that thousands upon thousands of Kashmiri Twitter users inside Kashmir were called upon by the police and the cyber cell, the cyber police inside Kashmir, and told that if they continued using social media, that now that they will be monitored and to be very careful. I mean, these are veiled threats, and that is, to be honest, that is a very kind of threat. It is a very pleasant threat if it's veiled. One of the worst kinds of threats is an open threat, and that goes for journalists such as Master Zahra, Gohar Gilani, Pirzada Ashik, Ghazi Shibli, and Fahad Shah, who have all been dragged to the police stations, questioned, interrogated, and some have been slapped with draconian laws as well. Now, during the post-August 5th lockdown, if anybody knows about how social media works, we didn't know, most people didn't know, that there is such a thing called digital deaths. And what that means is if you are not online for a certain period of time, social media companies will shut down your accounts because of inactivity. And that is exactly, it was very ominous for many of us living outside of Kashmir when we saw in many of the groups that so-and-so's number has been deactivated, so-and-so number has left the group, so-and-so account no longer exists. And that was because of the lack of inactivity for months on end in Kashmir. And then there was, of course, the censorship of accounts of those people that used to put forward the Kashmir narrative. And I think that in a nutshell, that's what I can say about the digital apartheid of Kashmir. But let us also remember that it is not limited, and our demands are not limited to 4G or even 5G or for technology and development. Modi declared after August 5th that they were going to bring development and upliftment and technology and infrastructure inside Kashmir. The only thing that we've seen are further human rights violations and atrocities being committed, murders being committed, India being in complete contravention of the Geneva Convention begin, nor do I know where to end. But I think that it is also important that we talk about different aspects of the Kashmir movement and the types of sufferings that we go through, because so regularly we talk about human rights violations and the law and you know, facts that happen on the ground. And although that they are important, we also need to talk about, as Altaf Saab has done today, the digital deaths, things that people can relate to, you know, in real time. And even at some point, I hope that we can also talk about the type of ecological warfare, the natural environment that exists in Kashmir, how that is being destroyed by India as well. And you only need to look at some of the reports of how India have used Kashmir as a dumping ground for nuclear waste. And on that, I think I shall end and hand over back to Altaf Saab. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Muzammil, for your valuable input. As we know that the lockdown in Kashmir, we are facing a double lockdown, as was said earlier. One because of the August 5th, what the Indians have done, and then the COVID-19 lockdown. And now the Indian occupied Kashmir has become an epidemic of epicenter of the pandemic. And you can see more and more cases in Kashmir and more deaths in Indian occupied Kashmir because lack of the health facilities and information related to the pandemic, because of the lack of internet services. As Muzammil rightly said, that firstly we heard about the disappearances in Kashmir. The people were disappeared. Now the people are disappearing. The WhatsApp groups and social media activities are disappearing from Kashmir. And the new media policy which the Indians have enacted in Kashmir, you can see the Kashmiri newspapers. There is no news about the incidents of human rights violations in Kashmir, and every content is being censored by the Indian authorities. And each and every social media site is censored, and all the social media users are being asked to give the information to the 22 Indian intelligence agencies who are making the surveillance of all these social media sites. So with this, I will now give floor to Mariana Zacca, a human rights lawyer from Italy, a good friend of Kashmir. Mariana, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Wani. Can you hear me, first of all?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wani. As you said, I'm from Italy and I'm a friend of Kashmir, given that it's more or less 2 years that we are working together on this issue. And I'm really glad today to share this panel and this place with my colleagues.
We can't quite hear you. Sorry.
What?
Your volume is very low. Your volume is very low.
And now, what about now?
Yeah, we do hear. It's okay.
Okay, great. So as I was saying, it's like 2 years that we are working on this issue at the international level, mostly at the level of Human Rights Council at the UN. First of all, when I speak under a human rights point of view, given that I'm a human rights defender, and every time that I deal with situations like that of Kashmir, and I ask myself, what's the difference between a democratic country and the situation we are analyzing? So the situation of Kashmir is not the first one we are seeing in this world. And internet apartheid is a way to prevent press information, press rights, and freedom of speech. When a government is taking this right away from people, it means that there is something more. And as we have analyzed, and you have greatly analyzed, as Mr. Khalid Mohammed has greatly said before, there is really something more. There is a huge and widespread violation of human rights in the occupied territory of Kashmir, because I would like to remind that, first of all, territory by India. So the law that we have to apply to this territory is the siege. So the occupying power, in this case India, has to grant every kind of rights to the people that India is taking under siege. In this case, I would like to say that, to clearly state that in the occupied territory of Kashmir, there is an ongoing attempt to modify the internal institutions, internal way of living, internal culture, internal, I mean, everything. India wants to change everything, the way that, the way through which today Kashmiri people are living in. In any case, as I have already said, this is the political framework we are dealing with, and it clearly seems that this internet apartheid is a way of military punishment against Kashmiri people. And as Mr. Wani has previously said, Kashmir is facing a double lockdown, one imposed by Indian institution and the other one imposed by COVID-19. And if you think about this, there is a great big issue behind this point. We already know that today information, whatever kind of useful news is spread throughout internet, newspaper, website, and stuff like that. So I ask myself, and I ask you too, how Kashmiri people may get today information about how to deal with COVID-19, how Kashmiri young people can attend their school, their university lectures, how Kashmiri women, for example, may get information about, I mean, whatever they want. For the major part of this population, it is quite impossible to get those information. And this is a big restriction of fundamental human rights. So India is not only restricting human rights of Kashmir people, but India is also imposing a siege and is also violating the law that applies during a siege, which is the international humanitarian law. As you have said repeatedly, during a siege, lots of things may happen. You have talked about bullet guns, widespread use of military force, widespread use of gender violence against women by the occupying force. All these violations may turn into war crimes or crimes against humanity. But even more, there is one point that I always highlight when we go to the UN. when you target a population due to its special status, such as religion, social or racial affiliation, national affiliation, it is not just crimes against humanity or war crimes. It turns into the crimes of genocide. And I'm urging the international community to recognize it, to recognize that India is putting this kind of siege in Kashmir because the majority of people living in Kashmir are Muslims, and because they want Kashmir to be independent. So we have a very big speech here to do about human rights. But what is urgent now is the restart of internet, is to push the international community to keep on speaking about the attention of international community. And I mean is bring the Kashmiri situation to the UN at the level of Human Rights Council, at the level of all the panels dealing with the 9 international covenants that are at the basis of UN systems, such as the covenant to recognize that gender crimes are crimes against humanity, crimes against the whole humanity, everybody. I mean, all the people may deal with this big issue. Another example is the International Covenant dealing with the right of the child. How many children have been taken at stake by this situation in Kashmir? There is another important covenant that you have already mentioned, the ICCPR, regarding the political and the political rights. And I think that in Kashmir, all those civilian and political rights are greatly being taken at stake and restricted in Kashmir. There are all these 9 covenants that are really important at the level of UN, and every kind of rights embodied within these covenants can be analyzed under the light of what is happening at the Kashmiri in the Kashmiri field. So last but not least, I would like to remind that when we face a situation of a state where freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of press, freedom of information, of spreading information is removed, is taken away from a population. So this is the first step of destruction of a population. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because if you think about the biggest human rights violations in history, all these human rights violations are have been told, greatly reported, reported also at the international level. And I would like to remind that we are facing the situation of Kashmir in other places, such as, for example, we can make a balance between, for example, the situation in Palestinian occupied territories, in Syrian territories. We can make a balance between Kashmir or the Apartheid in Africa. And you will see that the more the time goes on, the more the situation gets bad, and human rights are more and more violated. So we urge today I want to urge all the politician people that are looking and taking place in this panel to take all the possible steps to bring this this issue at the international level, to keep on talking about this, to keep on saying that India is violating international humanitarian law, international law. We have to say who is violating, what is the violation, what kind of international law is being violated. Not only saying that Kashmiri people are suffering. Saying that Kashmiri people are suffering is completely right. But we also need to say who's guilty, who has the duty to survey, to take whatever kind of step in order to stop the genocide and to stop the Kashmiri people from having the right of development being fulfilled and living with dignity. I would like, and this is the end of my speech, I would like to remind that human rights are really important for the life of everybody here, because they are at the basis of dignity, and life must live in the name of dignity. So yes, everything that we do or we are willing to do is based on the name of not only human rights but dignity. And this is the end. I am really grateful to Mr. Wani to have invited me here today and to join this panel with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mariana, for your contribution. You have been always there, and I'll just read out the UN Human Rights Council Resolution A/HRC/32L.20 regarding the Article 19. Promotion and protection of all human rights, civil, political, economic, and social rights includes the right to development, affirms that the rights that people have offline must also be protected online. In particular, freedom of expression, which is applicable regardless of frontiers and through any media of one's choice, in accordance with Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. And it also calls upon the states to address security concerns on the internet in accordance with their international human rights obligations to ensure protection of freedoms of expression, freedom of association, privacy, and other human rights online, including through national, democratic, transparent institutions based on the rule of law in a way that ensures freedom and security on the internet so that it can continue to be a vibrant force that guarantees economic and social and cultural development. So this is a resolution of the UN Human Rights Council, of which India is a member, and India is a signatory to the Convention on Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and also is a member of the Human Rights Council, but they bluntly derogate from all these obligations, whatever obligations there are, commitments they have made to the Council while ensuring their membership in the Council. So it's a sort of collective punishment to the people of Kashmir, which the Indian government, by imposing internet shutdowns, is imposing here. So I will now give floor to Dr. Afzal Khan Sahab, MP and Shadow Minister. Yeah.
Sir, sorry, I have to get another meeting now, so I have to leave. Okay. And I'm sure I'll catch up with Afzal Sahab later on. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sahab, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Altaf Bhai. Let me start by apologizing for joining you late. In essence, I'm on duty in the Parliament. Parliament is sitting Friday, which is unusual. We only do it about 10 times a year, but today it was my duty to be on a standby. So that's why I joined late, but I'm pleased that I was able to listened to 3-4 of your speakers. So I want to thank the Kashmir Institute of International Relations for this excellent seminar through Zoom, which we are exchanging this very important and vital subject. We've heard from excellent speakers, Muzammil Bhai, a young man who works very actively in the UK. I've come across him many, many times. Marina, again, an Italian citizen, again, at the international level, who's been engaged with. But of course, my own parliamentary colleague, Khalid, who has just left us, who is, of course, very experienced. And his highlighting of some of this hypocrisy, which you see generally with in relation to Belarus. Now, what I want to say is probably only 3-4 points. But in essence, I suppose a number of speakers have touched on this idea that the world itself is going through this COVID-19 pandemic, and in a way understands the impact that we've seen recently with our own Hajj, Eids and other things, how some of those festivals which we treasure, which allow us to come together, demonstrate as a community, socialize, celebrate, we have not been able to take part. And Hajj is one of the pillars, unheard of, that Hajj doesn't take place, or how it took place in such a limited manner. I cannot recall ever seeing this. So it shows actually the gravity of this whole situation. And then rightly, I think a number of the speakers have touched on how Kashmiri are actually getting a double whammy, not only with the COVID-19, but in the wider context of the security, how there's been a lockdown. And its implication on their life is actually totally, totally different from what me and you and others are experiencing. In essence, this is a good example. Here we are using this Zoom, we have international speakers joining in, so we are able to at least communicate. If there is any sad news, good news, anything we want, we can still reach out. And we have lots of these different platforms that we can use. And we've seen, as Muzammil rightly pointed out, that when the world is moving towards 5G, what we're seeing is a reversal in the occupied Kashmir that is going into 2G. Unimaginable, actually, some of the systems that we have this day and age of technology to be able to use with 2G. And I think he pointed out that the internet is actually 20,000 times slower. So if you do want to download something, you'll be there all day. It's just not practical, actually. It clearly shows the difficulties that the government of India is deliberately posing for the people of Kashmir. Now, this then, in a way, I suppose it takes us towards what we call now the digital apartheid. We've seen apartheid generally in South Africa, what it happens, but we're now sort of looking at this digital apartheid. So this rightly, I think, has increased anger, widespread, I would say, anger, which is also, of course, like I said, it's accompanied by the security clampdown as well, communication blackout as well in the whole region. And again, it was rightly pointed out, something like 500,000 jobs have been lost. So there is this economic strangulation which is taking place as well, which I think is also important. And not only that, then it has a knock-on effect in virtually every walk of life that we can experience. And with talking about COVID-19, health, of course, becomes even more critical. It's important, I would say, as a human rights facility, which one needs to have, but this putting a strangulation on those areas as well is important. And then probably the one which is concerning me most is what's having the impact on the young people. So you've got this whole economic impact, but then there's the health impact. And then I think is the third layer is exactly the young people, because end of the day, it's these young people whose future is being strangled. If they do not get good education, if the schools, colleges, universities are closed off, we've had that experience in Britain. But what we've done is trying very quickly to shift that onto the internet platform. So through that, their impact on their life, their future is then managed, so at least it's being reduced. But again, you can't say That is what is happening in occupied Kashmir. So that I think is a deep, deep concern, because ultimately with the world, we've seen the poverty gap that is there in the world, the North and South, but then you see this economic strangulation. But we will now be seeing this gap translated into technological side of it. And that I think is also pretty serious, because the future, we see the technology getting faster and faster, being sort of going deeper and deeper in our walks of life, the way we live as humans. Similar to the poverty gap, to developing a technological sort of a gap, which again, I think it's really not acceptable. It's not right, and nor should the Kashmiri young people be denied that future. So this whole thing is then moving on to what I would say is digital sort of as well. But I think it's also the whole idea of censorship and or security surveillance ideas. Again, we've seen some of the extreme example of that in Uyghur community. But this, again, you've got to be mindful of how this sort of technology can be used. So some of those security apparatuses using this technology in the very negative sense of strangulation of the whole community, again, is deeply and deeply worrying. I think we also understand this, how when we have this whole thing cut off, then how it sort of prevents the circulation of news, information, communication, also criminalizing all forms of political interaction. And that takes you towards then the press. That again is a pretty important element in any society this day and age. And then of course that touches you with the basic right of freedom. And what I find it deeply concerning, and I would say equally very offensive, is the point that what you see from India is that they are happy to get this idea that they are the world's largest democracy. But then in reality, what you see is on the ground with what is happening in Kashmir, how they are actually totally opposite. The very basics of a democratic society, they actually violate. And this is, I think, the most important concern in the other side of this whole political situation that we have. So there's a lack of total accountability from the Indian government. So I think these are many of those serious issues which are linked to the digital side of the situation that we find the occupied Kashmir in. Myself, I'm of course, as Khalid was saying, for a long time, I've been involved with the Kashmiri cause. My roots are connected to that part of the world as well. And in a wider context, as a member of parliament who does have constituents who belong to all the different parts of South Asia as my constituents, what I want to see is peaceful South Asia. I want to see peace and prosperity connected up in South Asia. And I feel that is part of my role as member of parliament, to be able to speak out wherever there is violation of human rights in any form against anyone, to make sure that I become the voice of the voiceless. And I'm pleased that in the parliament, we do have a very powerful, I would say, which is increasingly becoming more powerful, is the APPG on Kashmir, which has a cross-party support, which I think will play a pivotal and key role now in the British politics in making sure that our government, our main political parties are actually in tune with what exactly is happening, where they can actually push the government to cut out this hypocrisy, have this human rights standardized globally, and actually it doesn't matter who the violator is. We should always be standing on the side of the oppressed people. And in that sense, I hope to see a much better policy from a British government, which is much more fair, which takes into account the Kashmiri people and their right, which is in line with the Security Council's resolutions, to give them the right of plebiscite so they can decide for their future. Once again, may I take this opportunity to thank you for giving me this opportunity to share this platform with such eminent, great speakers who have shed so much light on this subject. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Afzal Khan. with your wonderful contribution and words of encouragement that the APGP and cross-party group in the British Parliament would further strengthen their base in the Parliament and push the UK government to end its double standards and hypocrisy vis-a-vis human rights and towards the Kashmir. I can see Dr. Mohammed Faisal, who's about the ambassador of Pakistan in Germany. If he's there, if you can hear me, Dr. Sabi, there? Hello? He's not there. So with this, I think we come to the conclusion of today's webinar, as I will thank you all for joining us to this webinar, especially Phil Bannon, Dr. Marina Zoka, Muzammil Oyub Thakur, Khalid Mahmood Saab, and also, as ladies and gentlemen, your valuable views on this subject and this digital apartheid. Actually, this all stems from the denial of right to self-determination to the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Because of that, we can see a regime of human rights violations in Indian occupied Kashmir, and the recent action on August 5th, which the Indian government unilaterally did by bifurcating the state and annexing the state into the Indian Union and imposing the Indian laws in the UN disputed territory, and thereby enacting a series of laws like the new domicile law, and to make people of Kashmir jobless, homeless, and to take away their land, and is a way also to defeat their the resolution of Kashmir and confusing the international community. But we have been campaigning on it. We have been creating awareness about the globe, telling the global community, though there is a sense of urgency in the civil society groups in the world at large. They have documented reports, they have issued the statements, and international press has been there. But unfortunately, the governments overall and the policy makers and movers and shakers of the world politics, they have not moved in yet. I don't see why they are so silent on this, why they are having this criminal silence on this issue, while as they could come to any other issue, they will rush to the General Assembly and to the Security Council and then will intervene there. But it has been Kashmir for the last 73 years. The Indians have been the party to the dispute. They have signed the agreements. They are part to the UN resolutions on Kashmir, and they are also part of the different human rights conventions. But the Indian government neither is made accountable for its record of human rights violations in Indian occupied Kashmir. Now they have become so arrogant, along with what they have been doing in Kashmir, Indian occupied Kashmir. The same thing is being repeated in the mainland India, with the minorities in India, especially the Muslims and Christians and other minorities and marginalized communities in India. And India is fast becoming a fascist state. It is no more a democratic or a secular India, which they used to say themselves. So I hope that world consciousness will awaken before it is too late, and this issue is resolved and people of Kashmir are given their rights, so that there can be peace in the region and peace, and because this issue is a threat to the regional peace as well as the international peace and security. I thank you all, and on behalf of my colleague Shugufta Ashraf and my other staff, I thank you all for being there, to participating in this webinar and giving your valuable suggestions and inputs. Inshallah, next time, there will be a next time, and I will call you again, and we will have the better interaction next time. Thank you all. Thank you.
You too, Mr. Wani.
Thank you.